Hi everybody, I'm Nick, and I want to talk to you guys about something called a false dichotomy. I wanted to make this video because I've been seeing a lot of things on Facebook, a lot of things on Reddit, Twitter, hell, Instagram probably, where people on both sides of the political spectrum, especially in this recent election cycle of 2017, have been making claims that are easily disprovable because they're a false dichotomy. And it made me realize that I think this is something that a lot of people are not familiar with. So I wanted to talk about it because there's going to be a lot of things right now in our culture and our politics that are very divisive. And no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, I think it's really important that we communicate with each other and do so in a way where we're not having stupid arguments where it doesn't make sense to talk about it because it's easily disprovable. And so without further ado, I just want to kind of jump into this. So a false dichotomy is one of a number of things called a logical fallacy. And if you're not already familiar with logical fallacies, look them up. It'll save you so much trouble in your life. Basically, the idea is a logical fallacy or logical fallacies, right? IES probably, is going to be a group of arguments, right? Group of arguments that people already know are wrong, right? So these arguments are wrong. Philosophers, lawyers, logicians, people who spend their time thinking about logic over the history of the world have figured out that there's a large group of arguments, not that big, but there's a reasonable number of arguments that come up all the time. And if you go through it, you can beat those arguments because those arguments aren't true. Right? They're called logical fallacies as a group. Do a quick Google search, you can go a whole list of them. Spend some time to look through them, and you can save yourself a whole bunch of time not getting confused or identifying things that are easily disprovable and not having to go through the whole logical framework of why that's the case. So yeah, logical fallacy, group of arguments that are known to be wrong. A false dichotomy is one of them. There's a bunch of these. Post hoc, ergo propter hoc, that's another one of the most common ones. Basically, the idea is that just because something happened before an event doesn't mean that it caused the event, right? So, you could have a scenario where the old superstitions, right? That's a really good example of post hoc, ergo propter hoc. People thought that if the moon came out right at a certain time, that would be a good harvest. Maybe there's some anecdotal science that sort of has a coincidence between those two things, but it's the idea of causation versus correlation. Just because things happen together don't mean they necessarily cause the other thing. No, they might, but you get to look into that separately. It doesn't mean that they do. That's not what I'm going to talk about today. What I'm going to talk about today is a false dichotomy. So I think the simplest example of a false dichotomy is, are you a cat person or are you a dog person? You got to pick one. The idea is it's presented as if both of those things cannot be true at the same time. And there's plenty of people who like cats and dogs. Now, those people are obviously wrong. Dogs are the way to go. But I think a lot of people would say it's completely fine to like both dogs and cats. So the idea is that a dichotomy is something that cannot be true at the same time. It's an either or, right? So if you're a programmer, you probably think of this as a Boolean, right? Normal person, you think of it as true false, right? So this is your sort of light switch, right? You get on, you get off, right? And you get a little switch in the middle, right? That's going to go one way or the other, right? So if it's set to on, it can't be set to off at the same time. It's one or the other. It can't be both. That's a dichotomy, and a dichotomy is a legitimate thing. Two things cannot be true at the same time. You can't be alive at the same time that you're dead, right? There's a bunch of these. False dichotomy is when you present something, like being a dog, cat, kind of person, and you can't be both at the same time, right? Whereas you actually can. So to give you some examples of these, one example that I want to give that we've seen where the left has said that this is a false or called this a dichotomy, basically presented as something that's invalid, that's not something that should be listened to, and then we'll do one on the right. So the one that the left has basically presented as a false dichotomy, or as a dichotomy, but was actually a false dichotomy, was the plight of the white working poor. Right. So, plight of the white working poor, fancy way of saying times are tough if you're broke and you're white. Right? And that's a valid concern. That people need there to be more jobs, and that we need to go focus on things that have traditionally given the white, lower income populations good jobs, reasonable jobs, things like manufacturing, things like mining, things that have been traditionally blue-collar jobs. Basically the presentation, and this was a bulk of the people who voted for Trump. This was one of their primary concerns. The left presented this as a dichotomy, that this was invalid. Right? They said that this was not a legitimate gripe. This was not a legitimate claim because, right, minority issues and poverty were worse. So the idea is that the position from the left, and they may not have said this explicitly, but it was pretty clear that this is what a lot of people were basically implying, if they didn't say it outright. But this is something that if you're on the left, you need to think about, because this is something that has been a problem, where people have basically presented the idea as the plight of the white working poor being invalid because, and this can be legitimately true, right? These two things can be both true at the same time, which is why this is a false dichotomy, because minority issues and poverty were worse. It's a false dichotomy because this can be bad, and this can be an issue that needs to be addressed at the same time that this is an issue that is bad, and the idea that it needs to be addressed, right? So minority issues and poverty in minority communities has to be fixed. Issues of poverty and income disparity and lack of opportunity in white communities have to be fixed. These are both true, and they're true at the same time. Therefore, they're not a dichotomy, right? Because they're both true. So this is a false dichotomy. And whenever you see something as presented as it's either one or the other, right, it may legitimately be a dichotomy. It may be one or the other. But anytime you see that, you should stop for a second and think about, is this actually a false dichotomy? Is this something that legitimately is, either or could this be both? So that's the issue where the left is guilty of this, right? If we go ahead and look at a similar issue, but from the opposite side, and it really parallels. I mean, these ideas, once you sort of identify this pattern, which is why it's considered a fallacy, once you can identify this pattern, you can see them all the time. The dichotomy going the other direction is Black Lives Matter. And this is almost a better example of a dichotomy because the messaging was clear. Right? Black Lives Matter is a very clear statement. And the idea was that the other side, the opposition, the right, typically would reply with, all lives matter. So the idea was, or, blue lives matter, right? Either one. So the idea is that the statement was that these cannot be true at the same time, right? Both of these cannot be valid, right? Either or. Well, pretty clearly, if you look at all, if you look at all lives, excuse me, if you look at all lives, all lives by definition would include black and blue. So these can be true at the same time. Black lives matter does not mean other lives do not matter. All lives matter does not mean that black lives matter. Blue lives matter does not mean that black lives matter. This is a false dichotomy. It's completely valid to, on the one hand, say, right, there is a pattern of abuse in minority communities. That's legitimate. Right? It's pretty clear. There's a pattern to this. Right? Lots and lots and lots and lots of black people getting harassed, having problems with police. It's equally as valid to say there are plenty of good policemen, and the people doing this abuse may be bad apples. Those two things are not contrary. Those two things are not, either or. And the idea is, both with Black Lives Matter, right, or with the plight of the white working poor, either one of these issues, if we get hung up on this dichotomy and we're having this argument, right, we're usually not sitting down and spending a bunch of time talking to each other and having a whole conversation where we can have an argument based on logic, and we can go break this down, and we can go through the whole logical chain of identifying this as a fallacy and kind of, going through the full argument as opposed to just saying, oh, this is an issue, this is the thing that we know about. We're not going to get anywhere. And I think we can all agree that there's a lot of problems going on right now. Right? There's a lot of problems going on right now. And we need to be able to have civil, informed discussions. No matter what side of the equation you're on. Right? Whether you're a diehard Trump supporter and you think that we need to drain the swamp. Right? Or you're somebody on the left who's very suspicious of Trump and you think that he may be crazy. Right? Either side. Whichever one you're on. Right? We need to eliminate stupid arguments so we can have conversations about how to make things work. False dichotomy is one of them. I really strongly urge you guys, if you're not familiar with the concept of logical fallacies, and I know that you are, and I know that this is, something that plenty of you guys have heard before. Maybe just a reminder for you guys. But for anybody who this is new to, go to Wikipedia, right? Search for logical fallacy, or heck, just go to Google or Bing, right? Whatever you want. Do a search for logical fallacy. Right? There's a whole list of them. Get an idea of kind of where those come from and the sort of ideas behind it. And the idea is then we can have more informed conversations, and then hopefully get the country to a place where, whether you're on the left or the right, we can both be unhappy. Because that probably means that we're in the middle ground somewhere, and that things are probably sensible. So, anyway, that's a false dichotomy. Just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about that. So have a great rest of your day.